Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity webinar series. NCORE is part of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. My name is Dedrick Perkins. I am the Senior Program Coordinator, and I am delighted to welcome you and to be your host this afternoon. Our hope is that we continue the conference tradition of working to improve racial, ethnic, and multicultural and intercultural relations on college campuses and community organizations by providing virtual learning with opportunities like this one. For those of you joining us for the first time, NCORE has monthly webinars on the first and last Wednesday of each month, with the occasional exceptions like for holidays and things like that. Some of the webinars are free and others are offered at a modest fee of $25. Our next webinar is NCORE 101. It will be presented on April 5th by myself, along with a panel of members from the NCORE family. So please visit our website for a full list of webinars for this season. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you need to utilize closed captioning, make sure the settings are set to on. Always remain muted unless you are requested to unmute. We ask that your background has no moving images or flashing lights. We also ask that if you have any specific tech, accessibility, or other operational concerns, contact me via direct message, the session host. We will try to make time for a short question and answer session at the end of the session. So if you do have questions, please use the question and answer box and we'll get to them. And now, help me welcome today's presenters, Lamont Sellers and Joey Lenny Moran.
Well, good afternoon, all. It is so good to see you. Happy to be with you. I'm Lamont Sellers, Director of Intercultural Student Affairs at Appalachian State University, and I use he, him pronouns.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joy Lenny Moran, and I am a program coordinator for the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange that works under Mobility International USA, a nonprofit organization. Go ahead, back to you, Lamont.
All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen now so that we can share our presentation with you. All right. So to start off, we do have our land acknowledgement. This land on which we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Lenape, and that's where Joey Lenny joins us from in New York, as well as the Cherokee and Catawba here in North Carolina. We pay respect to the Lenape, the Kohari, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Halawa Saponi, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, the Meherrin, the Saponi, the Occaneechi band of the Saponi Nation, and the Waccamaw Siouan peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the historic diaspora. So this is just a quick slide that if you would like to share your pronouns, these are quick instructions in order to be able to temporarily change that on your screen. I'll allow you a moment to take a look at that and be able to change those if you would like. Joelene?
Okay. Sorry, I was in the process of changing my pronouns as well and realized it was my turn to speak. So thank you, Lamont. I wanted to give us a chance to go over the agenda of what to expect during today's presentation. We're going to start off by talking about brave spaces and how we hope to make this a brave space to speak and talk about what we'll be sharing, and we'll also share our presentation goals. Our presentation is structured by talking through the micro perspective to more of an institutional change and what you can be doing as an individual towards the macro change level. And then we'll go through a quick breakout room for about 15 minutes to really put into practice the conversation starter kit that we'll be sharing with you. And at the end, we'll give you the opportunity to think through your own takeaways, look through some of the resources that we have to share with you, and of course, have time for questions. Um, in the slide here, we have a QR code that says scan me, and essentially that will lead you to a folder that is dedicated to all the materials relating to this presentation, that being the presentation itself, our breakout room handout, and additional resources.
So to start off, we like Joelini said, we want to set up a brave space here. And brave spaces are environments created intentionally to facilitate open dialogue, explore complex topics, and to take risks. Some of the common ground rules that we find around setting up brave spaces include agreeing to disagree. It's difficult to get a group of diverse folks into a room and not have some disagreement on things. So we can agree to disagree. Additionally, we have a ground rule around not taking things personally. This is a learning space, and there can be things that come up that just don't rub you the right way, or kind of just aren't quite there yet. But this is that learning space for you to be able to take those chances. We also encourage you to challenge by choice. It's not a requirement that you engage, but by your choice, you get to decide at what level and how much you would like to engage. And then also we ask that you respect one another in this space and no attacks. Some of the freedoms that come with having brave spaces is we have a freedom to be uncomfortable. One of the things that I work very hard on here at Appalachian State and other places that I have worked and done things is that uncomfortability just comes with working with people from diverse backgrounds, from different places, and we just need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. There's also that freedom to make mistakes. There's the freedom to learn from those mistakes, as well as the freedom to respectfully push back. So in creating this brave space today, we hope that you all will be able to engage in ways in which we're creating a space that you can be brave and courageous enough to share, but also not get attacked or feel bad about what things we talk about in this learning space.
Great, so let's get started. So as mentioned before, we're going to talk about things more of on an individual perspective and then take it to what tools you can use for yourself and your institution to implement changes. So my name is Joy Lenny, and the experience I bring to this presentation, part of it is my own experience as a study abroad student with a disability. Now, most of you can't see this, and sometimes I forget when we're virtual, but I am a wheelchair user. I use a manual wheelchair to navigate through life, and so that impacted my experience while abroad and sort of the preparation that I had to take to participate in that opportunity, and sort of gave me additional perspective to be able to think about how do staff members or faculty that participate in exchange, how can they make the experience, the preparation, the information that they provide more inclusive so that students like myself at that time with a disability feel comfortable and ready to participate. So part of my present preparation towards going abroad was really taking the time to go to presentations, resource sessions, and more on what to expect when going abroad. And some of the things that I learned through that process were that there were, no, we can go back to the other slide, were really that I had to think about my different identities and how those identities were going to impact me while I was abroad. Those being things like disability was the forefront of my thought because I am an immigrant to the US from Dominican Republic, and I was fully aware that access and disability access in general was different country to country. And so that was present in my mind as I was going abroad. But I was also a student of color. I'm a woman, and I also come from a low income background. And so I was thinking about all of these things and how they would impact the decision I made in terms of where I was going, um, being expense, and also access in general. My goal as a student was really to go to a place that I would feel comfortable and able to independently navigate on my own. But the goals of other students might be different. So I attended sessions on um, how a student of color might experience being abroad. What are some of those things? And then I would go to sessions on how being a first generation student can impact um, your experience. I also went to sessions on financing your experience abroad. And in each of these sessions, I would always bring up the question of, hey, I also have a disability. What can I do to think through some of the obstacles or concerns that might come with that? And a lot of the times, the answer was, well, you can go to the Office of Students with Disabilities, they'll have more information for you. But then I would go to the office, and that office would tell me, well, the people who are experts on OA sites and those experiences are the people from the Global Studies Office. And so it felt to me like I was like bouncing around from office to office, trying to get the information that I needed in order to feel comfortable going on an exchange. And so this really, for me, showed the importance of having disability information integrated into materials, being materials, whether it's materials for students of color, whether it's materials about financing or whatnot. Those were important things that I needed to know in order to feel like I would be successful in participating. We can go to the next slide. So some of the lessons that I learned from this experience in particular were that the Centers for Students with Disabilities should not be the only source of information for students with disabilities to understand how their disabilities or other identities may impact their exchange. Um, it's important to include the perspective and experiences of students with disabilities in DEI efforts and programming when planning sessions on information, on program opportunities. Um, it's also very important to add an accessibility component to study away resources because they can make a big difference. And by this, I really mean that, for example, one of the things that I did while I was abroad was be a global equity fellow for my study institution. And that gave me the opportunity to take time to look at the DEI related resources on site and think about what else could be added to them in terms of access and disability information. And so from that experience, I took the time to really hone down on some of the basic information about access. For example, how public transportation was accessible in London. Buses had ramps, uh, public cabs also had ramps. The tube was not as accessible, which is the subway, was not as accessible for someone who used a wheelchair, but was accessible to an extent, and you needed to know what were the maps and the resources that could tell you that information. Um, Things like being able to travel while you're abroad, having the information about how to get access services in airports was something that I found very beneficial, and so included in that set of information. And the last thing really is that study abroad programs don't need to be 100% accessible in order for it to be an option for a student with a disability. And this is really to the fact that I had specific needs and goals that I wanted to be met by my site, but that might not be the same for everybody. For example, I wanted everything to as much as possible, be on a flat surface in terms of housing and access to my academic center, but that wasn't 100% how it was. I had to walk in my academic center because all of the hallways were not wide enough for me to use my wheelchair. And that was something that I needed to compromise. But it was okay because I could still participate in the experience, and that was okay with me. Let's say if someone was supporting me and had decided, well, the hallways are too narrow, it's not going to be good for you, that would have taken away the opportunity to participate in that experience. We can go to the next slide. And at the bottom of that slide, there's just a link to a longer resource that goes deeper into some of the lessons that I learned and how I kind of arrived at those conclusions, so you can learn more. So how do you implement this disability inclusion perspective into your own resources? I would encourage you to consider a lot of questions, but to start, some of them being, what are the steps that you can take now to include disability information in your resources? How can you ensure that the DEI exchange initiatives that you already have are being disability inclusive? And what type of, or why is it so important to include disability related information? Some examples of things that can be helpful are ensuring that all your videos are captioned, preparing a list of English-speaking mental health therapy or resources on site, on the away site specifically, taking a look at access at the individual sites that you're referring to in terms of accessibility. And we have a few resources of those, so I'll make sure to link them in the post presentation resources. And then it can be something as simple as including a link to how public transportation is accessible for someone with a disability at the away site. And that is just like one way to get you started. And I know it seems like something very simple, but it can definitely make a big impact in sort of letting your students know that disability is something that you're thinking about and aware of, and that you're willing to have sort of that conversation. Go on. And it's to you, Lamont.
Thank you. So what we want to be able to provide you today is a way to be able to talk about these things on your campuses. And we decided to use Fran Peavy's strategic questioning model in order to be able to do that. And in creating this conversation starter kit, the conversation starter kit really does adapt Peavy's work on strategic questioning and approach to creating personal and social change. This form of questioning creates movement and digs deeper into situations to understand, create options and explore those options as you move towards solutions. So this is really solution oriented, but we need to be able to ask the deeper questions, the harder questions that need to be answered. This process is a means to center student voices in the experience and to make better policies, processes, procedures, and ultimately give them a better experience when they're abroad. So you've heard from Joelini about her experience traveling to England and how that was impacted by the back and forth with various offices. How can you begin to ask the questions to eliminate that kind of thing? Because it's not always intended that we want to do that, but the student affairs and higher education professionals we are, it ends up happening to students from time to time. So when we start specifically talking about strategic questioning creates motion. So it's a form of questioning that creates this forward momentum in talking and considering the answers to a very set of questions. It also creates options. You really want to be able to put everything out there on the table. Yes, there might be some things that are financially insurmountable, but you still want to put those things on the table because that is an option. We might not be able to pay for it, but it's still an option. So getting all these options on the table, and strategic questioning also digs deeper. It takes you through levels and asks deeper questions. And in this process, we want to avoid the whys. Our students share experiences with us. I was just with a group yesterday and was talking about Tyler Perry's play and said where he says, if somebody tells you who they are, believe them. When our students tell us about their experiences, we need to believe them. So we need to avoid asking the why questions and getting even deeper into what is really happening and going on. We also want to avoid the yes or no questions. Those answers really do put a roadblock in place and make it difficult for us to move forward, but we want to try to avoid those. Sometimes you do need to ask those to get to the next place, but the more you can avoid them, the more motion you can create in your conversations. Strategic questioning is empowering. So we want to be able to empower the voices of our students with disabilities. We want to center those voices. We also want to empower those that are actually working with these students. I know as an administrator in higher education, there are often times that we're making decisions on behalf of those that are actually doing the work, whereas some other office or administrative area is not really dealing with those things. So really empowering those voices. And then the last one within this is really asking the unaskable question. What is that thing that, and usually we have somebody on the team that can come up with those questions. Well, we want to create a space where we can ask the unaskable. Ask what things are barriers, what things are preventing us from moving forward, and really getting to the root cause of things. So with strategic questioning, like I said, there are two levels. Level one really is describing the issue or problem. These are questions that really dig into what is really going on here. One of those questions might be, why is it that students with disabilities are not studying abroad? Why is it that students with disabilities are not participating in faculty-led programs? That may be the issue or the problem. And then level two is where we start to dig deeper into that. I'm going to take you through the level one strategic questions, and strategic questions at level one are focus questions. They begin to focus us in because it's very easy to get into a conversation, and before you know it, you've gone down several different tangents and you end up somewhere that is not helpful in the conversation. So you want to ask focus questions that focus us in and bring us right to where the issue or the challenges lie. We want to ask observation questions. What is it that you see, that you hear? What is it that people are experiencing? Observation, what is actually there? Maybe that is asking observation questions about the forms that you have on your website. Maybe that is asking observation questions about what videos you have that are out there for students to use. From there, you can ask analysis questions that begin to analyze those individual pieces. And then the part that that we don't do so well a lot of times is asking the feeling questions. Now, feeling questions is a part of strategic questioning, and we don't tend to do that as much. But I can guarantee you, when you center the voices of students with disabilities, of students that are having challenges, and you really hear the feeling behind, you know, them not being able to participate, them not being able to be independent, or being able to access things, you really get a sense of how that is affecting them, as well as how you can move forward in being able to address those things. When we move to level two strategic questions, this is where we're starting to dive deeper. So we're asking visioning questions. One of the concepts that we talked about earlier was putting all the options on the table. What is it that we really do envision for our students? What is it that our students envision for themselves in this? We're asking also change questions in the second level. So what are the things that we currently have and what things need to change? Whether that's modifying them, whether that's getting rid of them altogether, whether that's finding out another way of being able to present or do something. Again, considering all the options. Like I said before, some things may be cost prohibitive, but if you put it on the table as an option, perhaps somebody around the table or somebody in that conversation knows of another way of being able to do things where you're not paying to reinvent the wheel, but using the resources that are available to you. We also have to consider the consequences that, you know, Joeleni shared with us about her experience, but there may be some sites that just are not accessible in various ways. So considering what those consequences may be and being very open and honest about what those things look like. The next one is considering the obstacles, whether that is money, whether that is people, whether that is resources, whatever it might be. You need to put those obstacles on the table because you really can't consider things unless everything is there on the table. You also want to do a personal inventory and support questions. So that's even asking of yourself, how you can go about supporting. What is it that I have done in my position to be able to help in this regard? What is it that my office has done? I'm leading, I lead the Office of Intercultural Student Affairs. What is it that we are doing to help and to support, and putting those things out there on the table? And lastly, personal action questions, because it's not enough for us just to sit and talk about these things, but there has to be some action that comes with it in order to impact the lives of our students and improve these situations on our campuses. So one of the things that I bring up about strategic questioning is that a special type of listening is required, because it's not just about talking. We can talk at length about any number of different things, but listening is also required in this, because it is a conversation. It is a dialogue. So listening for solutions that are hidden within the problem. We are so oftentimes we're so focused on responding to what somebody is saying that we don't stop and fully listen to what they're saying. So even listening to our students, if we stop and truly listen to what they're saying or the issue, perhaps there is a solution embedded in what they're going through. So really listening to pay attention to that is important. Dynamic listening and not passive listening. I practiced passive listening just last night. I was laying on the couch. My kids came downstairs, started talking, and I was passively listening. But dynamic listening lets those that are talking let you know through clues and through body language, through your responses, that you are actually hearing what they're saying. You also have to check your wandering mind. It's very easy for us to get into conversation, and then next thing you know, you're thinking about, okay, what are we having for dinner? What do I need to run by the store and pick up? Any number of things. And then the last one, and this is written just like this in Fran Peavy's work, is listening as if your life depended on it. We recognize that our students' lives depend on them getting degrees. Their lives depend on some of these international programs. So if we start to listen as if our lives depended on it, then we would start to respond in very different ways. So this special type of listening helps us to get to those things that really are at play and dealing with them in active ways. Now, I'm not one to sugarcoat things. There's just I did not develop that particular skill. But I want to fully acknowledge that yes, it's political. It's political because it leads to strategies for change. We want to maintain the status quo in a lot of situations. We don't want to upset the institution or certain people or certain groups. But if we're going to impact our students' lives for the better, then we have to start to look at, these changing things up. And that can be political. It can take political debates beyond dogma and ideology into fresh perspectives and on common problems. So as we start to talk about things, we need to, like it says, move that forward momentum and getting past what we've always done and what has always been said around these things, and even dealing with the bias and stereotypes that many have towards students with disabilities. And oftentimes these things are unconscious, so people don't even realize that they're doing it. But we need to be able to challenge that kind of ideology and begin to find solutions to the issues that arise. And then it's also transforming your attachment to your own goals and opening up options for common goals. So thinking about what this means, not just for you, But what does this mean for us opening up a whole host of things, opening up an entire world to our students that may not have access in certain places or in certain ways? And I like this quote that Joelini shared with us as we were preparing this, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to improve it. So in a lot of cases, we have some great things going on and happening. We just need to improve on those. Some additional considerations when we're talking about strategic questioning and creating this conversation starter kit is let the ideas emerge from the students affected. Yes, we do have, the post exchange or post travel surveys and those kinds of things, but open up the opportunity for students to really talk and dialogue about what they have experienced, what has gone on for them. Look for the change view of students affected. What has changed with them? What has gone on that has really opened up for them? This can lead to some very good conversation around those things. Creating a neutral and common ground. That we're not pitting students against one another, we're not pitting offices against one another, but we're going for a common goal. Oftentimes that's student success, and that success looks different in various places, but we can get to some common ground. Creating respect. That everybody has their own expertise in their own areas, but bringing those things together and respecting that. And then lastly, again, listening to pain. Going back to at the first level, those feeling questions, listen to what our students are really saying to us, those that have not had the opportunities to participate or to do various things. Listen to what the feeling is that's coming across in their voices. That can be a huge motivator for the things that we take action on and do. Joelini?
Yes. So now that you've gotten the opportunity to hear from Lamont, what is the goal and the purpose of the conversation starter kit, we're going to have you all go into breakout rooms to discuss. Right here in the slide, we have a QR code that you can scan to look for the handout. We'll also put the link in the chat box, but we'd like you to assign different roles to those in the group. So think about who wants to, read through the handout and sort of guide the conversation. We'd like someone to report out at the end. We'd like to discuss sort of like our findings and discussions as a larger group. And then have someone be a timekeeper. Now we'll have 15 minutes for the breakout room, and we'll give you a warning just 5 minutes beforehand. And just as the breakout rooms are getting set up, I am going to put the link to the handout in the chat box.
I just put it in there.
Oh, thank you, Lamont. All right, so we can go on ahead into the breakout rooms.
Okay, great. Let's see.
All right, you're good to go, Joelini.
Okay. Well, hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you had some good conversations. Does anyone want to get us started with sharing out? I know we had a couple of groups in group 2. You had a couple of different rooms, so if anyone from there wants to start.
I can start, I guess. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay, thank you. Hi, I'm Carrie Vanderkar, and I'm here with the team here from the Cal Poly International Center. We're in Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in California. And I'm hoping that we followed the prompts correctly, but we were really using the time to look into some of the data we have about students with disabilities who study on our programs. And we looked back to data from 2019-20 going into the pandemic and looking at the kinds of disabilities that students disclosed and with our Disability Resource Center and seeing that the percentage was about 8% of our students who studied abroad identified with our Disability Resource Center as having disability. And so thinking about how can we ensure that our efforts are reaching students and what in our marketing, in our partnership building, and the questions that we're asking our faculty, our new partners in terms of accessibility, how we can be even more intentional about that. And so that our student representation on our programs is really reflective of the population of students on our campus as a particular metric would be wonderful to see how we can support. And then having the information in the spaces with our students and really appreciated hearing about your experiences, Jolene and Mayusa. I used to live and work in Eugene, Oregon, and very familiar with Mayusa and love the work of the organization. And so thinking too about opportunities to cooperate with you all, with even more with our Disability Resource Center and have awareness building about options for students. And so that was the thread of our conversation. Again, I realized that there are probably a lot of prompts we didn't cover. The time went so fast, but just appreciate the opportunity to think about how we can be more intentional in what we're doing in our office.
Yeah, I think you did great. Yeah, definitely looking at some of the past experiences of students and the types of students that you're receiving in your programs is definitely a start. And I think that, yeah, to your comment, one of the things that really stood out for me is just in Mayusa's work in particular, we sort of encourage the collaboration and interwork and partnership between the disability office on campus and the exchange office on campus. So sort of, trying to figure out if there's a particular team that can intercollaborate between offices so that you can each use the level of expertise that you have and sort of combine it in order to support students. And that's really sort of like having the best of both worlds come together to ensure that access and success is the best for all parties involved. And so that's one of the ways that we encourage people to think about it. It's really, we're not asking you to know what you don't know, but rather use the partnerships that you have at hand to improve the process that you have and the resources that you have access to. So yeah, a great start. Lamont?
Yeah, that was great. I don't have anything to add to that. I guess we can go with the next group that wants to share out.
We can. I think we were group room 2. And similarly, we were wondering institutionally, what are the connections between the study abroad programs and also disabilities? And so really looking at how they're supporting each other, asking questions to think about what resources they share with each other and what communication they have with each other. We also thought about assessment in terms of how are we capturing the holistic. So when we're looking at those feelings, are we providing it with room for narrative, or is it just more like survey based? And so really thinking about how we're assessing the space and the program and accessibility to really make sure it's all aligned with inclusivity.
Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah, definitely a good approach to understanding how each party sort of what they bring to the table. Anyone else want to share out from the campus groups?
Oh, great, we're on, perfect, okay. More than one of us might be sharing, but we were talking about, we kind of focused on alternative breaks at UMD, which is our short-term community service learning experiences that take place during the various like winter breaks, spring breaks, sometimes over the summer. And so that was the main kind of focus of our conversation. Thinking about how we have seen more students with invisible disabilities participate in the program versus students with physical disabilities. And so asking why that might be, what are the sort of restrictions or limitations that are kind of inherently already in place in the program, so that we know like what we could do to shift those. Do you want to add anything else?
Well, I mean, I think that's definitely an example that you had. That's which one? That we did plastic.
Oh, right. And so a few years back, with our alternative breaks program, we did have a student with a visual impairment who had like a seeing eye dog that needed additional support in the program. And so that experience and this presentation today is making me think about like, what steps did we take then that need to and can continue to inform practice of that student came to us and told us those things. We didn't necessarily have things in place pre that to prepare our team, and that student kind of guided us through that process, and we were very fortunate. But I feel like to some of the points that you all are bringing up, what are some of the things that we can be doing to already naturally be prepared for that, to be thinking about locations that we're at, and do they support a student who might need to be bringing a seeing eye dog with them in the housing sites that we're at or the vehicles that we're transporting in. And so I think we really honed in a lot around, I think, like analysis questions in particular, to the forms of questions that you all were, the breakdown of types of questions that you all were having us think through the activity.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. I think one of the things that you mentioned is sort of like how you have, I'm imagining it's faculty-led programs in between breaks. I see nodding heads. Yeah, one of the resources that we have at MIUSA is specifically targeting faculty-led programs and sort of how to prepare faculty to think about access on a wider level. So that's one of the resources that is linked on our resource sheet that you have access to. And another thing you mentioned was just the guide dog experience. We have specific resources for students who are blind and low vision and use guide dogs, and sort of what are the considerations they need to take in order to think about those things while abroad. Like certain locations might not be best to have your guide dog. So how do you sort of navigate that difficulty? And then also just specific information for the student themselves. And I think you shared earlier that one of the things that you did was sort of let the student lead you through that experience. And again, we're not asking you to reinvent the wheel or know what you don't know. So it's really like that was the best option that you had at the time, was really allowing the student to share their expertise because they're the experts in their own experience. So oftentimes that is the way to go, is allowing the student to sort of give you the information that they think might best suit them, and allow you to support them through a successful experience. And that's really when you talk about what are the parties that are involved in your experience, how can you best use them? It's by really allowing each party to bring their own perspective and expertise into the planning in itself. The difficulty of having students with physical disabilities participate is something that we see across campuses, across exchange in itself. And it's really because, I mean, I can speak to from personal experience, is that there's not enough information about physical obstacles that may present on abroad. But what I tell people is that, like, people with disabilities are among the largest minority of around globally, and so there are people with disabilities living all over the world. So there's definitely a way to be there. It's just not it might not be the way that you are used to, like the student is used to. And something to sort of share is that, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a land um, legislation, so it applies to America. So access abroad is not going to be the same, and so that's one of the first things that students need to be aware of. Like, you're going to work with them to see how they can best be successful on their abroad site, but there's nothing you can do about structural things. Like, you can't you can't just make changes to public streets because that's out of your jurisdiction per se, but you can help them to figure out what is the best way to sort of navigate that while they're abroad. So yeah, I think you're all on the right track per se, to understanding how to implement that perspective into your work. Anybody else want to share before we move forward? I will just read out a comment here. It says, thank you for the opportunity to share. They're on prompt 1. Well, we'll have time for Q&A, so if there's anything that you want to share during that, I encourage you to. Lamont, anything else before we go into resources and takeaways?
No, I think we're good.
All right, so if we can have the screen share one more time. Thank you. So earlier I mentioned that I'm representing a program coordinator for the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange. So NCDE for short. It is an ongoing project to increase the participation of people with disabilities in all types of international exchange programs and opportunities. It's sponsored by the U.S. State Department of Bureau of Cultural and Educational Affairs, also known as ECA, but it's administered in its implementation by Mobility International USA. So we're sort of the house that puts this into practice. And what that really means is that as the NCDE, we have a number of free resources and services that specifically talk to disability inclusion in international exchange. We have tons of online tip sheets, stories, and best practices that you can refer to. Some of those are linked in the resource sheet, but I really encourage you to take the time to explore the website and sort of look at the resources that are intended for exchange professionals, because they really get at some of the, what are some of the ways that you can have a conversation with your student with a disability about the supports that they need. But there's also stories and opportunities for students to sort of understand what their experience may be like while abroad. We have print and digital publications, a podcast, tons of webinars on the MIUSA YouTube page, and lots more. And lastly, there is a consultation and referral service. We call it our INR service, and that's really where you can send in any question relating to disability and exchange that you may have, sort of like, if you have a student who has medication, what can they think about? What medications or what precautions do they need to think about when taking medications abroad? Let's say you have a student who is deaf and you're trying to figure out what kind of resources or whether you need to find an ASL interpreter or that kind of information. So really any question that you may have, the team takes the time to research and sort of get you started in your role to support your student or anything really related to that. We can go to the next slide. I wanted to share one of our most recent resources, which is the most recent issue of the A World Awaits You journal. It's called Intersections Abroad, and it is a collection of stories from travelers with disabilities who are exploring their identity and other aspects of their experience in exchange. So, for example, there is a story about a student who is deaf and participated in multiple internships abroad, and sort of what are the considerations that she had to take for those experiences, as well as how her identity as an Asian American impacted her experience. And lots of other examples, but I really encourage you to take the opportunity to read through the stories, because it's really gives you more insight into how disability is really a part of those other identities, and it's kind of hard to think about service and planning and separating those things. We have to think about it in terms of diversity and thinking through it together. Okay, and lastly, our call to action to you all is to really think and reflect on how your DEI work in exchange can be more disability inclusive. So not just waiting to react to students who participate in your programs, but really thinking about the messaging and how you can put a disability inclusive forward language so that students feel like exchange is an opportunity for them. And then to encourage your students themselves to think about, reflect and plan for their experience while embracing all parts of their identity and how they intersect with one another, and sort of how that impacts their daily life and may impact them abroad. Next one. And this is really time for Q&A. But as individuals who went through this presentation with us, we invite you to think about what are the things that you're going to keep doing, stop doing, or start doing as a result of thinking about a disability inclusive approach to your work. Lamont, anything that you'd like to say about your hope for their takeaways of the session?
Yeah, this is all meant to avoid those all shucks moments, and start to think proactively about how we engage with our students, what we put in front of them, and how we can get them involved in these processes to go and study abroad, to go on faculty-led programs, even to help faculty think through those things. There is a resource in the folder that we're sharing with you on faculty-led programs and directed more towards faculty. I'm actually leading a group next year to Ghana, so I'm actively looking at how I am promoting it, but also thinking ahead of those things that just need to be in place in order for students to engage, regardless of what disabilities or identities they may hold. So really thinking, and it really comes down to being intentional. Intentional about those connections with various offices, with various folks across your campuses, as well as colleagues in other places that have been able to do this well.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions or takeaways that you want to share? I know there was one group that wanted to share out, so if you'd like to share now, you're welcome to. But if you have any questions, this would be a perfect time to ask away. I think we can go to this last slide, just for them to contact information. But that is about it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. It's really great to be able to have so many different perspectives, especially hearing yours today, Joey, Lenny, and Lamont. One of my favorite things that you spoke about is traveling abroad, because like many others in the session, that's not something that I had thought about previously, especially considering the legislation for ADA, as you said, Joey Laney, is only specific to America. So thank you for opening. That's one of my key takeaways that I've had today, along with others that are on my notes. But thank you for opening our eyes to that. And also, we appreciate your expertise and your intellect in sharing that with us. We appreciate that very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So before we end
Yeah,
the
thank
webinar, are we? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joelini.
Yeah, no, I was just going to share. Unfortunately, I have left my position at MIUSA, but my colleagues are extremely knowledgeable and have lots of resources and can be an ongoing resource for you all. So if you have any questions, like I mentioned before, on disability and exchange specific questions, like how to support your students, or if you have a student who wants information on access to a country or something else, I would invite you to reach out directly to clearinghouse@myusa.org. And I can assure you someone will take the time to do extensive research and help you get started in your supporting your student. Yep.
It's gonna be great. Okay. So thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next week.